So, when you are dealing with the Creator God, you have infinite knowledge, infinite skill, omniscient, all-powerful. So he can make life like that. If you have evolution, which has no intelligence, no skill, no guidance, no direction, it takes an infinite amount of time. It takes an infinite amount of time. 20 billion years is not enough time. Furthermore, what on earth is going to happen? Let's assume some miraculous process did this. While that silly little protein, half a protein, sits around, it's got half the sequence done. 10 billion years has passed. What's going to happen to the half sequence that has been formed? It's going to disintegrate. Time is not the hero of the plot. It is the enemy of the plot. You follow me so far? So far, so good? Okay. Let's take a look at what all this means. That makes one protein. Only one. It takes 30,000 proteins just to make the tail of the flagellum. Now, I didn't go into this the other day. This tail portion here, this last stretch on the tail that actually spins, is composed of proteins much like this. That's basically a close-up of what the tail looks like. It is essentially a hollow tube. All these protein assemblies are glued together. They're polymerized together. Now, when the bacteria reproduces, like most bacteria, it splits in half. One half gets to keep the flagellum. The other half has to make its own from scratch. While it does that, it assembles these parts, and after building this mechanism, it sends all the parts for the flagellum up through the middle. So they came up through the middle of the tube one at a time. There are some bacteria that are missing the gene for this cap. As a consequence, they do not grow a flagellum. They're missing one gene. That's all it takes. This is an incredibly complicated system. It is irreducibly complex. You lose one gene, you've lost 90% of the system. You've just lost all your power. It's like a car. If you remove one tire or remove the drive shaft, your car is no longer good as a car. Might be good as a house, as I use mine for all the time, but that's about it, okay? You can't drive it around. You've lost your motility. But here's the thing. When it assembles this tail, it sends the protein up the middle. Now, this cap has flexible legs, 5 of them. The last time that it glued or polymerized the last protein into place, that biochemical reaction attracted the leg, and it stuck to that side. Notice now it leaves a gap. And so when the next protein comes into place, it only has one place to go. It is guided by the cap into place and glued in place. That attracts this leg and this leg, leaving a gap here, where the next protein assembly coming up will then get directed into place and glued into place. And it builds it up like that for 30,000 proteins just to make one flagellum tail. Now, the thing is, what do I do with my remote control? There it is. That's how many proteins it takes to make one flagellum tail. Just one. The largest protein known to date is 26,926 amino acids long. Anybody want to do the math on how long it's going to take to do that one? Or how many random tries per second you're going to need to do to make that one? You're welcome to, but I'm not big onto math, so I'll let you guys do that. Furthermore, and this is very interesting, I'm going to show you several examples of not just irreducible complexity, but codependency within living systems. For example, proteins are made by the ribosomes, but the ribosomes themselves are made by proteins. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Anybody know by chance? The chicken. Oh, everybody says the chicken. No, no, no. It's the wrong question. It's not which came first, the chicken or the egg, because it's not the chicken or the egg. It was the chicken and the rooster that came first. There's the answer. They asked the wrong question. And in this case, it's the same question. It's not one or the other, it's both. But here's the thing. Once the ribosomes make the proteins need to be folded. There's a very specific system for folding proteins. Essentially, they're like little nano robots, and they take the protein, they bring it over to this barrel-like factory, stuffs it in there. The barrel-like factory helps the protein fold in a hurry, spits it out. But the thing is, the robots and the barrel-like factory are all made of proteins. So which came first, the folded proteins or the factory that folds the proteins? Which is made of the folded proteins. It's all codependent. You cannot have one without the other. So, let's take a look at biology from this perspective, and you can quote me on this. If anybody asks you, you can tell them Ian Juby said this. The theory of evolution is neither scientific nor natural. It is scientifically invalid. I mentioned this the first night. The law of biogenesis is quite simple. Life begets life, or life only comes from life, and like begets like. You don't see a cow giving birth to a cat. There's a reason for that. Okay? That is the law of biogenesis, which was first proposed by this guy right here, Louis Pasteur. You're probably already familiar with his name, because most likely most of you have drank pasteurized milk. Now, what's really interesting, next time you see that jug of pasteurized milk on your table, remember Louis Pasteur, who invented the system for pasteurizing milk, and the reason he invented it is because he disproved evolution and published his work the same year Darwin published Origin of the Species. God answered Darwin through Louis Pasteur before Darwin even spoke. Here's what he did. He ran an experiment, because in Pasteur and Darwin's day, it was believed that life came from dead things. For example, if you leave a piece of meat on the ground, eventually maggots grow on it. So people looked at that, the meat was dead, but living things grew on it, therefore life must come from dead things. So what Louis Pasteur did is he took two flasks, he pasteurized them. Basically, he boiled them to kill off everything inside the flasks, and they had basically soup broth, in effect, inside the flasks. One of them he plugged. He plugged the neck of the flask. The other he left open. So the one that was left open grew a whole pile of bacteria in it. Pretty simple stuff. The other one that was sealed did not grow bacteria because it was sealed off from the environment. He then broke the neck off the one that was sealed. It then grew bacteria. So he scientifically demonstrated the life was actually contamination. The life came from life outside of the container. That's what happened there. Now, Pasteur, okay, I mentioned that already. Secondly, the evolutionists believe in what we call the prebiotic soup, something like what Pasteur had, a broth, if you will. Okay? The thing is, if there was ever a prebiotic soup in Earth's past, we should see evidence of it. We don't. It's completely gone. We're going to take a look at in more detail with that. Now, the law of biogenesis, again, life only comes from life. Like begets like. There are only two exceptions to this portion of the law, that life comes from life. Life came from non-life in two instances. They were Pinocchio and Frosty the Snowman. Now, most scientists don't believe these stories, therefore we are left with not a single incident violating the law of biogenesis. And that is why it is a law. Now, here's the thing. Evolution claims life came from non-life. Therefore, evolution has claimed to violate scientific and natural laws. If it violates scientific and natural laws, that means it is neither scientific nor natural. Okay? We're going to come back to that some more. Like begets like. These are the laws of biogenesis. They are laws. They cannot be violated. And if you did, it's a metaphysical process, a miracle. Evolution requires miracles. I'm curious, has anybody taken Miller's experiment in school anywhere or discussed it? Anybody? Only the people my age. Okay. Well, people younger than me, I mean. Yes. Okay. Miller's famous experiment was done in the 50s. It was heralded by the press with headlines like, "Scientists make life in the lab." That's a bit of a stretch, to say the least. Here's what actually happened. Miller and his professor in university tried to simulate the world as they thought it was in the beginning, okay, the prebiotic soup, if you will. They took water and put it in a closed circuit, and they added hydrogen, ammonia, and methane. They boiled it to get water to come up through here, going through here, and they added sparks to simulate lightning. They then condensed it, came down here, put it through a trap, and sure enough, as fascinating an experiment it is, don't get me wrong, it is a fascinating experiment, but sure enough, after a few days, they produced amino acids, the building blocks of life in there. Now, this is far from life. That's like calling a pile of bricks the Empire State Building. Okay, that's a good analogy, right? And perhaps that's even a crude analogy, because the Empire State Building does not compare to the complexity of a cell, not even close. So to say that this was life is a stretch, to say the least. Now, here's the other thing. You'll notice several things that Miller did. Number one, he removed oxygen. There's no oxygen there. Does anybody know why he removed oxygen? I already gave you the answer. What's that? Yes, you got it. Because what happens when you mix hydrogen, oxygen, and lightning? You're not going to get life, let's put it that way, okay? You're going to get a mess. It's going to blow up. So he removed oxygen. This is not realistic in nature. We have always had oxygen. Always. Secondly, he filtered out the life. Where on earth are you going to get a nice, convenient trap to filter out the amino acids in our environment? It's not going to happen. Furthermore, the amino acids it did produce were produced in a toxic brew of tar and carboxylic acid. Only 2% of the brew was actually amino acids. Those amino acids that were produced were split 50-50 right hand, left hand. Okay, right is right, left is wrong. Okay, so right-handed amino acids are toxic to life. Guess where we find right-handed amino acids? Places like snake venom. And later on tonight, I'm going to show you some experiments, some fascinating experiments with snake venom. You might be surprised at what the world was like before the flood. So, only 2 to 8 amino acids were formed. As you recall, I mentioned earlier, we need 20 for life. At best, they only produced 8. The textbook that was used at the high school I taught at in Ontario made the flagrant and false claim, I can't believe they had this in a brand new textbook, grade 12 biology textbooks. They claimed all 20 amino acids were formed for life. I asked a number of world-leading experts in genetics and biology. I read the statement. Every single one of them scoffed. They all said, what? They are out of their tree. No one has ever produced all 20 amino acids. That is a flat-out lie in the textbook. Brand spanking new. So, amino acids, lastly, disperse in water. They don't join together to make proteins. You ever heard of the term the universal solvent? That's water. Water is known as the universal solvent. So the water is actually going to disperse the amino acids, not join them together as proteins. Moving right along. Let's forget Miller's experiment here. We're going to cheat. We're going to start with nothing but the basic building blocks of life. We're going to take Mr. Blender and Mr. Frog. And we're going to put Mr. Frog and Mr. Blender, and don't try this at home, okay? It's a thought experiment, that's all, okay? We're going to put Mr. Frog into Mr. Blender, put Mr. Blender on puree, and we're going to add some energy. We're going to take our frog soup and put it out in the sun for a while. Are you going to get life? No. This brings up the second law that evolution must violate in order to produce life from unguided processes. Because we're starting with nothing but the building blocks of life. We got aminos, proteins, enzymes. Heck, we even got some cells in there, I'm sure, that are left over after our puree process. But even if we have a dead cell, we as intelligent people cannot make it live again. Life only comes from life. We started with nothing but the basic building blocks of life. What's going to happen? It is going to decay, and our proteins, our enzymes are going to fall apart and disintegrate, and they're going to release the energy that was used to assemble them. It is going to release them as waste background heat. This is called the second law of thermodynamics. It is another law that evolution must violate in order to produce life from non-life. Once again, if evolution has violated scientific and natural laws, that means evolution is neither scientific nor natural. It is supernatural by definition. So the prebiotic soup theory, I mentioned it briefly. You got to remove oxygen, but it is not realistic. Oxygen would oxidize the amino acids. That's the other problem, and that's the other reason Miller removed oxygen, because he knew it would destroy the amino acids as fast as he made them. So we had to remove oxygen. The thing is, if you remove oxygen from our environment, number one, if it was any time in our past where it was gone, we should see evidence of it in the fossil or geologic record. And what amazes me, I hear a lot of people talk about these banded iron layers and saying, see, that was our prebiotic soup world because it's red iron. Hello, it's red iron because it's oxidized. And they don't seem to clue into this. They just completely miss it. Anyway, there is no evidence of a time in Earth's past where we had no oxygen. Secondly, even if you did remove the oxygen, everyone claims there was oceans there, they need it for life. But ultraviolet light then comes in unhindered because no oxygen means no ozone. So that means ultraviolet light would come in, hits the ocean, breaks it apart into hydrogen and oxygen. Specifically free radical oxygen, which is very destructive to amino acids and any form of life. You can't escape the oxygen problem. Now, by very definition of the word, if you violate scientific and natural laws, you are venturing into the metaphysical, the extranatural, the supernatural. By very definition of the word, you are departing from what is usual or normal so as to appear to transcend the laws of nature. If you are an evolutionist, you believe in the supernatural. I had one guy on YouTube, a skeptic, said, oh, whatever made you think that evolution was a supernatural process? My answer, simple. Whatever made you think it was a natural process? Pretty simple. Every observable science refutes evolution. Okay. This brings us to the scientific tool of intelligent design. Contrary to what Judge Jones said at the Kitzmiller-Dover trial in Pennsylvania, he made a nonsensical statement, I can't believe it, but he claimed that intelligent design is creationism in disguise. Nonsense. We have a dilemma. I've just showed you evolution is a supernatural process. We can't study it within science. Obviously, creation is also a supernatural process. It involves a supernatural entity. So we have a dilemma. Both creation and evolution are believed in blind faith. We cannot study it scientifically, so how do we know scientifically which one is correct? This is where the tool of intelligent design comes in. Scientific tool of intelligent design, every single one of you use it every day. When you look at a car, you know it had a creator. No one has to tell you this. You scientifically deduce it. This is no longer blind faith. This is scientific deduction. So let's put that tool to good use. We've already been using it. Here's the cell. Now, the living cell is just like something straight out of Star Trek. You have robots that run up and down all these fine wires, which I wish I had the animation with me to show you. It's mind-blowing stuff. These robots will carry gigantic, by their size, car-size molecules, and will walk up these strings, carrying parts from one part of the cell to the other. Other transport mechanisms go through like automatic garage door openers that go through force fields. It's incredible factories driven by robots that make all these parts for the cell. It is mind-boggling stuff. And if you go to the Harvard website, I'll try and get you the link tomorrow because you have to watch the video. They have a video, an animation they made, a day in the life of the white blood cell. And it shows you how the white blood cell, first of all, travels down the blood cell, how it finds an infection, identifies it, the actions and reactions that happen within the cell, how it changes its entire shape, can actually now fit between two cells, go into the infected area and attack the infection. It is mind-boggling. Atheists will be without excuse on Judgment Day. I'm sorry. All of creation declares the glory of the Lord. It's all around you. The cell, when we take a look at it, the DNA, which is the blueprints on how to build the cell, or how to build you, or any part of your body, the DNA is housed within the nucleus of the cell. Those blueprints contain the plans for the protein factory. The protein factory produces proteins which are used in everything, including the assembly of the cell wall, and including driving the energy system, or the energy factory, if you will, the nuclear power plant, if you will. Okay? So they produce the nuclear fuel for use in the nuclear power plant, put it that way, okay? Here's the thing. The DNA provides the plans and the blueprints for the protein factory. But the protein factory makes the proteins that are used to make the DNA. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The protein factory makes the proteins that are needed in the assembly of the cell wall. But the cell wall is what holds everything, including the protein factory, together. The protein factory produces the proteins that are necessary for the energy system, but the energy system, or the energy plant, is what provides the energy for the protein factory to operate. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Or are we asking the wrong question? It's not which came first, it's how did they all come about at the same time? And the answer I would suggest, intelligent design suggests, it was a creator. Now, DNA, how many people have heard the expression that chimp DNA is 98.4% genetically identical to human DNA? Has anybody heard that claim? 1, 2, 3? Okay, a couple. 4. Okay, I'm surprised. It's a very common claim. In fact, I've forgotten the gentleman's name. He was the head of the Genome Project, and he's a Christian, but he's a theistic evolutionist. And even he made that claim on national television. I was floored, because a man of his intelligence should know better than to make that claim. First of all, right off the bat, that's a 1.6% difference, okay? We're going to look at that in a second. The chimp genome is 10% longer than the human genome. That should immediately raise red flags. 98.4, wait a minute. The math doesn't work out here. How can the chimp genetic code, the DNA, how can it be 10% longer than the human genetic code, yet be 98.4% identical? It doesn't add up. The reason, there's more reasons to that, but the point is still that it remains the same. It is impossible, mathematically speaking. You can't have it that way. Now let's take a look at that 1.6% difference. Now, what they did is they lay out the two genomes side by side, and where the layer matches, or where the base pair matches, that's considered a match. They're identical. That 1.6% adds up to 42 million differences. You can do the math. 3.2 billion letters, 1.6% of 3.2 billion is 42 million. That's how many differences have to happen. As little as one change is enough to kill an organism. One. How do you propose to change 42 million without killing the organism and killing evolution with it? You can't. Plain and simple. Genetic changes are called mutations. Now, in humans, these mutations have never been observed to add information, which is what evolution requires. Evolution has to add information to the existing organism in order to evolve, okay? Within humans, over 3,500 genetic disorders are known, and these are caused by mutations. Not one of them is an increase in information, and this is well documented in the scientific literature. Again, I'm going to come to this book here. It can be a bit of a tough read, but it is an excellent book. Dr. John Sanford is one of the co-inventors of the gene gun. He was an atheist and evolutionist. His own research brought him not just to conclude that we were created, he brought him to the salvation message of Christ. And he became a born-again Christian later on. He has now published this book called Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome. He goes into incredible detail about what I'm about to talk about next. An excellent, excellent book. I highly recommend it. I got into a short debate with a guy on YouTube over this subject, and it was obvious he only knew enough about genetics to be dangerous, and I was just wasting my time. So I just walked away, basically. But he made all kinds of ad hoc arguments that do not stack up to the research nor the scientific literature. Now, let's assume that mutations are allowed to happen, or that mutations are necessary. Sorry, mutations are necessary for evolution. Let's take a look at what happens next. You have, in your body, little robot-like things that run around your DNA doing nothing but looking for errors or mutations and fixing them so that, heaven forbid, you don't accidentally turn into a chimpanzee. Because we hate it when that happens. Okay. Now here's the thing. Here's what happens. This is the process. The DNA is damaged, or when it's copied, there's a misprint, okay? So you wind up with usually it's C and G joined together, or T and A. Let's say we have a T and G that accidentally joined together, okay? It's a misprint or a miscopy. This little robot comes along. It's called endonuclease. Comes along, it rides the ladder rung, spots the error, and cuts it out. Cuts it. Exonuclease comes along and removes the error, the mismatched gene. Polymerase then comes in, adds it with the correct base, and ligase then comes along and glues the backbone back together. It's an incredibly complex system that looks for errors in your genetic code and fixes them. Why? Because mutations are lethal. They kill. Now, that brings us to this point. If the repair mechanism is missing, it can kill you. A friend of mine actually had a genetic disorder where the repair mechanism for his eyes, the genetic code in his eyes, was missing. And as a consequence, he wound up going more and more blind throughout his life because the repair mechanism was missing. It was damaged. It was gone. The thing is, if that repair mechanism is gone, you die, and in short order, because the genetic errors accumulate, and they get more and more and more accumulating and bigger until to the point where you can no longer properly maintain your body and you die. So, as a consequence, if the repair mechanism is missing, it kills the organism and the evolution. Evolution needs the mutations, but the repair mechanism removes the mutations. If evolution has been going on for millions of years, we should have been dead 1,000 times over. And that was actually part of the title of an article written by an evolutionary biologist. Why aren't we dead 1,000 times over? We have not had enough time for evolution, and if we did, we should be dead. Evolution not only cannot plug the holes in the bottom of the boat to explain how the holes were plugged, it can't even explain where the boat came from in the first place.